What if the town's most feared woman was once the most quiet? What if a man of God shattered a boundary no holy text could forgive? And what if vengeance arrived not with fury, but with a simple haunting melody? She was brought here in chains, yet she left behind a path of ash. But what unfolded in that house was never truly buried. Are you ready to face the truth of who Adara truly was? If you want to uncover more stories like this, the forgotten, the suppressed, the ones we cannot allow to fade, then join us by subscribing to The Forgotten Cell. The next case might already be knocking at your door. On the highest slope of Cachoeira, where the earth grew sparse and the trees seemed to yearn for escape, stood a house the locals mentioned only in whispers. They didn't call it cursed. They said it was burdened by sorrow, stained by secrets, touched by something ancient and profound. The manor belonged to Reverend Iliakim Vasconcelos, a man known for his sharp sermons and impeccable posture, whose voice once filled the small chapel with the certainty of a coming storm. To the public he was pious, disciplined, and righteous. But behind the closed doors of his home, where no congregation could judge him, his devotion began to unravel. The first sign of his fall came not with a confession, but with a song. It began quietly on nights when the wind curled strangely through the hills. A melody, mournful and low, wove through the branches like smoke. It was not in Portuguese or Latin, but a sound older, rhythmic, and achingly sad, as if it were rising from the depths of a well. The source was soon discovered, a young woman, barely a girl, who avoided everyone's gaze unless she was forced to meet it. Her name was Adara. She had arrived from the coast under circumstances no one ever dared to discuss, a wedding gift for the Reverend and his bride from a family far more prideful than pious. She was slight, silent, and outwardly obedient, yet there was something about her that felt untouchable. She wasn't beautiful like a delicate doll, but in the way firelight is, subtle at first, but dangerous to watch for too long. She moved through the house as quietly as breath in an old lung, unseen but vital. The Reverend began to watch her, first with simple curiosity, then with something the scriptures had no name for. He saw the way her hands moved while she worked, and the soft hum that escaped her lips when she thought she was alone. He told himself it was pity. He told himself it was spiritual concern. But every time he passed her, the words of the sermon he was writing would vanish from his mind. His wife, Dona Margarita, was not a naive woman. She noticed the subtle shifts, the glances that lingered too long, the prayers that went unfinished, and the way her husband spoke Adara's name with a strange, lingering note. At first, she denied her suspicions, then she grew cold, and finally she began to listen at doors. The house grew silent during the day, but at night the song returned. Neighbors began to talk. Some believed it was witchcraft. Others claimed it was sorrow set to music. No one dared to confront the Reverend directly. But the pews in his chapel slowly began to empty. His fiery sermons on sin and damnation lost their heat. He quoted scripture with less and less conviction. Eventually, he stopped mentioning hell altogether. One night, long after the servants had gone to sleep, Iliakim was seen standing outside Adara's door. He was not reciting prayers or giving commands, but whispering words that were soft, human, and deeply wrong. She did not answer. She simply opened the door and allowed him inside. What happened between them was never spoken of. But the following morning, Adara sang again, and this time, the wind did not carry it away. By the end of that summer, the Reverend no longer belonged to the chapel or the town that once hung on his every word. His hands trembled at the pulpit. He misquoted scripture and stared past his congregation as if haunted by a ghost standing just outside the church doors. They whispered that the weight of sin was etched onto his face, but none could name the sin aloud. Behind the quiet walls of the manor, Adara's presence grew more powerful. She no longer drifted through the corridors like a ghost. Her footsteps, once hesitant, now echoed with a quiet authority. She was still called a servant, but she was no longer treated as one. The Reverend began to give her tasks reserved for his most trusted men, managing his books, ordering supplies, and handling the key to his wine cellar. He claimed it was charity, an effort to educate and redeem her, but it was something else, something sacred to him and profane to everyone else. She never laughed in his presence. She rarely spoke, but she always listened. And he spoke as if he were desperate to be heard, even when his voice was a broken whisper. He told her of dreams, of visions, and how her song broke the silence inside him. He claimed she brought him closer to the divine than any prayer ever had. He stopped leading prayers before meals. He no longer knelt at night. Instead, he read to her. Scriptures, yes, but also poetry, letters, and the laws she was forbidden to understand. Then he gave her the Bible. Not just any copy, but the one passed down from his father, with its Latin notes and dried flowers pressed between the pages. He placed it in her hands as if it were a holy relic and said nothing at all. From that moment on, something irreversible began to grow between them. She began to read the book on her own, and he began to sleep beside her door. It was a new kind of unholy devotion, one built on a foundation of whispers and secrets, and it was about to ignite a fire that would consume them all. The townsfolk began to notice the change in the Reverend. He no longer walked with his head held high. His posture was slumped, and his gaze was guarded. He started refusing invitations, missing important meetings, and leaving baptisms and funerals early. His wife, Donna Margarita, vanished from public life completely. Whispers spread like a fever. Some claimed the Reverend was cursed, others spoke of possession, and a few believed he had simply lost his mind. But Donna Margarita was neither passive nor blind. She watched everything from the corners of rooms and from behind drawn curtains. Her anger did not explode. It hardened, becoming brittle and sharp. She saw the way the Reverend looked at Adara, not with lust, but with a reverence he had never once shown her. At night, she began to lock her bedroom door. She stopped speaking to him at meals. She started taking communion from another priest. The subtle acts of defiance gave way to outright sabotage. Broken wine bottles in the cellar, pages ripped from his journals, and scripture smudged from the walls. The house groaned under the weight of its secrets, and the servants kept their eyes on the floor and their mouths shut. One evening, Donna Margarita stood before Adara without a word and struck her across the face with such force that a tooth came loose. Adara didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply turned her back and walked away, her bare feet leaving small red drops on the cold stone floor, droplets that dried into something almost like a silent, terrible scripture. From that night on, Adara's beautiful song was gone. The silence now belonged to her alone. Some silences are louder than thunder. In the weeks that followed, the manor became the home of such a silence. Donna Margarita's movements grew sharper, her voice tighter. The entire household moved around her like water around a stone, carefully, fearfully, knowing that a quiet storm was brewing beneath the surface. She no longer needed to ask where her husband went at night. She already knew. She no longer questioned why he had stopped touching her, blessing her, or even speaking to her beyond cold, ritual pleasantries. His love had drifted somewhere unreachable, and it had not gone to a woman of her world, but to a servant, a girl born in chains. For Margarita, this was worse than betrayal. It was a total erasure of her existence. Adara continued her duties with quiet, precise movements. She still spoke little, but her silence now felt intentional, as if she had learned to use it as a weapon. Her posture was straighter. Her eyes no longer avoided anyone's gaze. She moved through the house not like a trespasser, but like someone who was simply waiting for everyone else to realize she had always belonged there. Margarita watched and waited until her resentment hardened into a cold, cruel plan. She summoned the head overseer, a brutal man named Reverend, to her chambers. What was said between them behind those doors was never spoken of again. But that same night, under the cover of darkness, Adara was taken from her bed. They dragged her into the rear courtyard, where the deep shadows swallowed the stars. There were no witnesses, at least none who would ever speak. She was bound, stripped to the waist, and whipped with practiced precision, not as punishment, but as a warning. 12 lashes, no more, no less. Each cut a message from one woman to another. Know your place. But Adara did not cry. She made no sound, not even when her knees buckled or her skin split open. And that silence, cold and unwavering, frightened Reverend far more than any scream could have. When they left her there, bleeding in the dust, she remained upright on her knees, her eyes wide open, fixed on the single glowing window of the chapel above. At dawn, the Reverend returned from a supposed sick visit that turned out to be a lie. He found her alone, barely conscious, her back slick with blood and dust. He carried her inside himself. No servants were called. No prayers were spoken. When he re-emerged from the house, he went straight to his wife. What was said in that final confrontation was forever a mystery. Voices rose. Something shattered. One servant swore she heard the Reverend cry out, You crucified what you never tried to understand. Another claimed Dona Margarita called Adara a witch and a curse in their home. What is known as this? The next morning, Dona Margarita was gone. Her belongings were untouched. Her jewelry lay on her vanity. Her shoes remained by the door. The carriage had not moved, and the road bore no fresh tracks. The Reverend told the town she had left to visit family, but no letters followed. He didn't just lose his wife that night. He lost his very soul. No replies ever came. Her absence became a shadow that stretched across every corner of the manor, a silence that felt heavier than any noise. Whispers spread, of madness, of murder, of a body buried beneath the house where no one dared to look. And through it all, Adara healed in silence, in shadows, in stillness. The manor grew quieter without Dona Margarita, but the silence brought no peace. Instead, it brought something heavier, a slow, watchful, expectant rhythm. The servants moved less. Doors were shut with careful hands. The very air thickened as though the house itself had begun to breathe. Reverend Eliakim no longer addressed the town. His sermons ceased altogether. The chapel doors remained closed, dust gathering on the pews. Baptisms were postponed, funerals reassigned. What little correspondence he kept was written in a hurried, unsteady script. Inside the manor, his entire world now revolved around Adara. She no longer served. She no longer obeyed. She simply existed, unshaken, silent, and increasingly strange. Her wounds had healed, but the scars remained visible, thin, pale ridges across her back like a map etched in suffering. She wore them without a hint of shame. In fact, they seemed to empower her. Eliakim followed her with the devotion of a man begging for absolution. He stopped shaving. He barely slept. He prayed not to God but to her very presence. She had changed slowly, subtly. Her gaze lingered longer. Her words, when she spoke them, were measured and sparse, never soft, never warm. She spent long hours walking the grounds alone. Some nights she was seen standing in the garden, whispering to the trees as if speaking to something just beyond sight. That's when the symbols began to appear, drawn in charcoal, carved into the floorboards, etched into the walls behind curtains, shapes no one recognized. Circles within circles, crooked stars, broken eyes. They were not Christian, nor indigenous, nor even fully coherent. They simply were, and they multiplied. A housemaid fell ill and spoke of shadows watching from the corners of rooms and voices whispering from beneath her pillow. Another servant fled in the night, claiming Adara had stood at the foot of her bed, unmoving until dawn broke. These claims were never confirmed, yet no one dared to refute them. Fear had begun to ferment in the town below. The rumors grew darker. Some said Eliakim had summoned a demon. Others swore Adara had never been human to begin with, that she was something bound in flesh, now freed by blood. A few old women would cross themselves whenever the manor was mentioned, whispering about forgotten gods brought over in chains. But nothing tangible occurred. No deaths, no fires, no plagues, only the suffocating sensation that something beneath the house had woken and was now listening. Then one evening, a diary was found. It belonged to a young novice priest who had once apprenticed under Eliakim. It had been hidden in the chapel loft, wrapped in linen and brittle with mold. The final entry read, "She speaks to no one, yet I feel her voice inside my dreams." The Reverend does not lead her. He follows. I believe she has remembered something ancient, something lost, and I fear he has asked her to show him. The handwriting ended abruptly, and though no one said it aloud, it became chillingly clear. Adara was no longer merely present in that house. She had become its center, its altar, and the rite she had begun, be it curse, liberation, or prophecy, was not yet finished. The last days of Reverend Eliakim Vasconcelos were lived without time. The sun rose and set, but within the manor's walls, light seemed hesitant to enter. The servants had all either gone or disappeared into the silence. The house was nearly hollow. Only two figures remained, the man who had once preached judgment and the woman who now stood beyond it. He no longer addressed her by name. He called her blessing, curse, answer. He wrote prayers that no longer included God. His journals devolved into frenzied ramblings, fragments of visions, glimpses of past lives, numbers, sigils, invocations that resembled neither Latin nor Yoruba, yet carried the weight of both. He ate little. His bones pressed against his skin like roots beneath thin soil. Still he followed her. Still he waited, Adara never raised her voice. She spoke only when necessary, and when she did, the very air seemed to pause. Her presence was no longer warm or cold. It simply was. In the rare moments when Eliakim dared to meet her eyes, he found no hatred, no affection, only knowledge. He had once believed she was the source of his temptation. Now he understood she had been his mirror all along. It was a boy from the town who found the body. He had been sent to deliver eggs to the kitchen, a task no one wanted. The front gate was open, the windows dark. He entered, trembling, calling out. No one answered, but the chapel door stood ajar. Inside, the boy saw the final sermon. The Reverend knelt before the altar, dressed in white, his hands folded as if in prayer. His eyes had been removed. 2 empty sockets faced heaven. Blood had dried in thin rivulets down his cheeks. Around him the floor was covered in symbols, written not with ink, but with something the boy later whispered was much darker. The crucifix had been turned upside down, not shattered, not desecrated, simply inverted. Adara was nowhere to be found. The authorities arrived in silence. There was no investigation, no arrests. The case was ruled a suicide, even though no blade was found, and no man could explain how he had done what he did to himself. The body was buried without ceremony. The church was shuttered and the manor was left to rot. But the town never forgot. In the months that followed, children claimed to see a woman in white standing near the hill at dusk. Farmers heard humming in languages they couldn't name. An old priest passing through the area fell to his knees upon entering the abandoned chapel, weeping, though he could not say why. Years later, a letter surfaced. It was unsigned, written in the Reverend's own hand. To love her was to look upon the divine and find yourself unworthy. I opened the door. What walked through was not vengeance. It was memory. The manor burned 5 winters after his death. No cause was ever determined. The fire left nothing behind. No bones, no furniture, no records, only ash. And the hill remained barren, as it always had been. Some say Adara was never meant to be freed. Others say she was never meant to be bound. But all agree the story did not end with fire. It began with a song, and somewhere it is still being sung.